when someone tries to take my reputation, take my good name, I will take that energy and I will transfuse it into cash. You say things the way that they are. You tell the truth, as unpopular as it may seem. In all likelihood, 90% of people agree with you. They're just too afraid to say it.
My guest on the podcast today is Joshua Lisec, the million-dollar ghostwriter of more than 80 books, including one of the best business books I've read in recent memory called So Good They Call You a Fake. The book has made me so much money, it's stupid. And it's all about positioning yourself as the expert guide for the clients that you seek to lead. And he helps you build an expert system with no steps skipped that positions you at the very top of your industry and allows you to command the kind of prices that your competition never could. But as he explains, your haters are your biggest marketing asset. And always remember that bad reviews from bad people are actually good reviews. All that and more is coming up, so let's get into it. Joshua, thanks very much for showing up on the podcast. It's fantastic to have you here. I finished your book in several days. I mean, I read it, rather compulsively over a few sessions. Took plenty of notes. I think I have about 3 or 4 pages just of notes from the book, and that I've been immediately applying to my own business. To stand out, capture attention. And that's you're right. I mean, attention is currency now. There's something to be said for a nice quiet life, no doubt. But if you want to, build any sort of name for yourself, you have to have like a strong, dedicated personal brand. It has to be out there. It has to be memorable, and people have to be talking about you, or you're pretty much irrelevant. You're a master at this. How did you get to this point? Like, what are the things that kind of launched you in the very beginning? Were your first like crucial lessons where it just finally started to click? You started to sort of finally get the attention that you always knew that you deserved.
Thanks for having me on, Matt. I appreciate it. First things first, going back to the very beginning, most people that you talk to who become ultra successful in their space, they never set out to be ultra successful, much less successful at that specific thing. There was always something else. And even the great inventions and innovations throughout history often came about by accident. But looking backwards, it looks like it was intentional, even though if it was spur of the moment, a hunch, a whim, they were entirely focused on something else. And they just noticed something and they thought, maybe I should change my plans. That was the case with me and the journey that I've gone on to become a ghostwriter. I've ghostwritten more than 80 books, bestsellers. And of course, there's So Good They Call You a Fake. But there's another book deal I've gotten from a major publisher that we can maybe do a little bit of a preview on perhaps right now. But all of that which I have achieved, and not just for myself, but for the personal brands that I've designed, I've developed, and I've released into the world on behalf of my authors writing their books. It never started out that way. And that was never the intention, much less the design. It was largely by accident, but not entirely by accident. My journey begins with wanting to be a novelist, like I talk about in the book. That was my ambition. That was my intent, that I was going to be writing fiction under my own name. It started as a side hustle. It parlayed a little bit into unexpected freelance writing because, well, I'm writing to sell books. I guess I can write to sell other people's stuff, writing product descriptions and short sales letters and that kind of thing. More than 12 years ago, almost 13 years ago now, is when and how it all began. But then something interesting happened. And that was that 2 of my clients of my freelance writing business read my novel that I had written. I'd written 2 novels by that point, but they'd read my first one, and they both asked me to help them with their book. I was not expecting that. I didn't even know that ghostwriting was a thing yet at that point. And I thought, well, this isn't the plan. I guess I can pause writing my 3rd novel. Yeah, I guess we'll see what happens. Try it, we'll see. And that spirit of try it and we'll see is behind so many, as I said, inventive innovations, not just those that have transformed our lives through technology, but also that have transformed our lives individually to create unexpected success that's far and above anything of our dreams that we had as hopes or goals or ambitions while young. And it was helping people write their books like they asked me to. And I thought, okay, why not? And so, okay, why not? We'll really take you places.
For sure. One thing I've noticed is that you have to sort of be a contrarian and you have to be right. If you get those 2 things, that's something that's different that people, not a whole lot of people believe yet, but you're absolutely right. And you're ahead of the curve. And I mean, that's sort of happened again and again. You've written 80 something books. That's wild. Your first clients, you're like, how
like how did they even hear about you? Is sort of like how did you sort of build your credibility from the ground up? Did you have to sort of I imagine you did a whole lot of outbound things like everyone does almost when you're first starting out. How did the first few clients show up?
Yes, it was by marketing my novels, actually.
Mm.
And this is what a lot of people at the very beginning of their journey totally miss because it's hard to do. It's easy to get clients. It's hard to do with excellence the thing you're trying to get clients to do. That makes sense. So there are innumerable aspiring ghostwriters of
Mm.
nonfiction books who do what I do. How many of them have authored a book that's any good under their own name already, much less two? Probably 0.02% of them have. And there's the problem. If you want to become a professional copywriter, where are all the sales letters that have sold six figures of product that you're selling? And that is a record scratch moment. It's a stop the music moment. It's a stop the madness moment. It's a get off the pot kind of a moment. Because you're saying, oh, I have to be confident at the thing already that I'm going to be selling as a service. Yeah, you kind of do. And this is where those who were looking for a get rich quick scheme get off the
Mm-hmm.
bus to prosperity town. And that's okay. That's okay. But regardless of what it is that you want to be doing, you got to be doing it first for yourself. And we see this very simply with fitness trainers, personal trainers, health and wellness coaches. You got to look like a supermodel or nobody wants to work with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a given. Every personal trainer's website is glamour photos. The men as well, by
Yeah.
the way. Like they look like they're in a bodybuilding competition, many of them. Or they look like supermodels for
Mm-hmm.
the women do. That's how their websites are designed because you're the role model. I'm hiring you so that I can look like you. And this is what put me far and above anybody else as a ghostwriter, even though I started my journey when I was 20 years old. And I'm beating people out for jobs, gigs, and contracts that are 50, 60 years old. And they've been doing this for a while. None of them had authored a book that was under their own name. And here's to a guy who did it twice. So I had a much greater head start, or did I? Because I had spent, 3-4 years of my teenage years working on these novels and making them as good as they could possibly be and getting a small but still not insignificant publishing contract with an independent publishing house.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did the work. And if you want to be a copywriter, you got to do the work. If you want to be a fitness trainer, do the work. Whatever it is you want to sell as a service or do as a business, you got to do the work for yourself
I,
first.
I found that there has to be this sort of baseline of competence to sort of undergird the confidence, right? People, especially now. I feel. I'm not the only one that thinks this, but the internet's become more suspicious. It's like show me the testimonials, show me the proof. I want to actually see, that you can actually do that you are who you claim to be. And if you don't have that base competence, I find that people get found out before too long. But that's actually great news for people like you and I, because we actually have like real established competence that we can display. And the gap between us and other people just keeps getting wider and wider. For myself, how I've established credibility. And actually, I took this idea from Scott Adams, who you've ghostwritten for. One of his books, I loved it. It's How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. An idea that I still remember listening to the audio version of that book, and how he says, it's very difficult to, reach the top 1% of any one field, but how it's comparatively easier to break into the top 10% in two fields and combine them in an interesting way. You see that happen all over. And I feel like one of the main reasons why I've sort of risen as quickly as I have is because I can combine the extensive reading. Like I've taken notes on 1,200 books. Yours was numbered like 1,230 or something, and I have this established like 10 12 years of being like heavy into fitness. I have like the physical credentials too, right? And combining those two things, a lot of people just haven't seen that before, and it commands attention. It stands out, and there's so many people just doing book reviews, and who have bigger audiences than I do, and there's so many people who have who are much better physiques than I do. But it's that intersection of those two things that's remarkable. It's what Seth Godin would call a purple cow. You see a purple cow, you have to talk about it, you have to share it. So I found that I found that to be interesting. Now, can you? I know you can't really say who else you've ghost written for, but I'm always curious. I've probably read at least several books that I didn't know that you wrote. Now, which are you able to say which Scott Adams books you've written and some other books that you've ghost written, or most of you can't say?
Yeah, the work I do with Scott Adams, I classify more so as developmental editing, copy editing, line editing. I like to joke that Scott does all his own stunts, but he does have a stunt team, if you know
Mm,
what I mean.
sure.
That said, the favorite book of his of mine that I like to talk about is Reframe Your Brain, because it's so aligned with what I do in hypnosis.
Mm,
Reframing comes from neurolinguistic programming, which is a sister practice of hypnosis. It's roughly 60, 70 years old. It's more so like quick and applied hypnosis to conversation and
mm,
to even mass persuasion. Um, but that is a fun book for anyone to pick up. And it's also an intersection book. It's a fusion book that takes on some topics that are consistent, perennial best-selling topics in the self-help space, but combines practical hypnosis to it. The book So Good They Call You a Fake is also a fusion book, it's an intersection book. It's taking the concept of new PR, which means that hit pieces about you, getting canceled, negative reviews, haters, all of that is your most valuable marketing you could ever have. Take that together with building an expert business where you've got information products, consultant coaching, and services, and fusing those two seemingly separate topics together and making a business out of it, or in this case, making a book out of it. And I've done that consistently with authors that I've worked on in variety of spaces where there's a how-to aspect that they're teaching, but they're teaching it with a unique method, with unexpected techniques, with counterintuitive ideas, or even totally counter industry. No way this is going to work. This person's a quack.
mm,
Ideas that get traction and they get noticed, and it brings the person opportunities to get paid.
mm. And naturally attracts haters. I know you say the best, like the best or good any publicity is good publicity, but you say in the book that the best publicity is absolute hatred. I believe that's a direct quote from from So Good They Call You a Fake. And yeah, I haven't really leaned too much into that, just because I mean, I I'm sure I do. I guess I have. I'm not sure how many of my opinions are actually all that controversial. I'm sure I do. I mean, people are going to disagree with you no matter what. But I've actually been kind of consciously trying to bring in more, not necessarily just picking fights for the sake of picking fights, but sort of consciously bringing more controversy and sort of spectacle, almost like drama into my work in general. And the worst thing I think you can be now is boring. I mean, like just to have like nothing to say, nothing to attract you in the first place. And I mean, people slow down to watch car crashes or car wrecks, right? So and there's such a fine line too. I mean, I don't want to I don't want to just spark controversy and start fights for no reason. But if you have something legitimate to say that that you almost have to say, that you staunchly believe and that you couldn't not say it, and I think you do have to be sort of more forthcoming about that and sort of stand your ground almost and refuse to offer any sort of apologies for like your true opinion. And the people who actually agree with you are going to like respond to that quite powerfully, as opposed to the sort of both sides ism of like, well, both sides have a point type thing that nobody really cares about, even though that like that more nuanced view, it's just a slippery slope into sensationalism and kind of like chasing after drama and fights. People have built their whole brand along that. I guess it all depends on what you actually want. No, there was a sort of a controversy surrounding you. Tell us about the Mary Sue thread.
Yes, precisely. So this idea of getting canceled is something that a lot of people fear. Founders,
Mm,
entrepreneurs, investors, they are terrified of negative PR, which results in boycotts, it results in customers leaving them, it results in vendors dumping them, it results in opportunities closing the door to them. But what anti-fragility, and this is what I recommend, that everyone become as much as they can
mm,
anti-fragile so that they can effectively afford free speech. And, oh, free
It's
speech is
huge.
a fundamental democratic value. BS. Anyone who's ever said anything that is not universally seen as okay, that's outside the Overton window, has immediately seen how far that right to free speech goes. So what we want is to be able to afford the right to free
Mhm.
speech, and becoming anti-fragile is one way to do that. But it's in the context of being willing to say what you mean, not self-censor, and not self-edit. Like, well, I can't say that because people are going to think. What does it take to get to the point where you don't have to do that? This is what I aspire to. This is what everyone I recommend aspire to. Is that place where you can speak freely your mind and afford the consequences. That
Mm.
said, I had built my business to a place where I was able to do that. Now, the origin story, the background of this now infamous Mary Sue thread, and I'll explain to those unfamiliar what that means. I have noticed over the last decade or so, the memoir authors that I work with, they often want to project, particularly the public figures, they want to project a one-dimensional version of themselves out into the world. Celebrity memoirs are like the reverse tabloid. Tabloids are fake news that's negative. Memoirs are fake news that's positive about the person. They have control of the message. They can shape what it is that they want to say. It makes for terrible reading, though. It is not a fun reading experience when it's just a glowing self-adulation, self-aggrandizement, and self-praise. It's just no fun. And so what I have done over the years is I've coached authors to think about themselves as living a 3-act structure and following the journey of a protagonist where there's internal turmoil and there's self-doubt and there's striving for things that are ultimately unachieved. And what was the inciting incident? What was the thing that happened to you that changed everything? Not it was all perfect. I've always wanted to be successful, and now I'm successful, so buy my products. What's the real story? What are the dark times? The struggle. Tell me about that. These are the conversations I've had to have with public figures and anyone who's come to me for help with their memoir. Now, thinking through that, I couldn't help but notice in popular culture how screenwriters, creative directors, executive producers, production companies have fallen into a similar mistake, particularly with female characters, with female protagonists, or supporting cast, doesn't matter, where the female characters are one-dimensional, where look at this badass girl. She's so badass. Look at this first scene. She's amazing and perfect at everything. And her struggle, her heroine's journey, is to come to believe in herself more and understand that she was perfect all along and everyone was wrong. And that is the story of roughly 1001 movies, shows, video games, comic books, and other media featuring female protagonists of the last probably 15 plus years. Everything I've just described there to a T. Now, this trope where there's a one-dimensional female character who's absolutely perfect inexplicably. She's 98 pounds but can beat up 300-pound men who've been training in martial arts for the last 20 years without any weapons, and they're all armed to the teeth with submachine guns. Like that story that we all know and are perpetually subjected to by Hollywood entertainment. It's a one-dimensional character. It's called the Mary Sue, where the female protagonist is inexplicably good at everything. And that reminded me of the public figures who've come to me wanting to write their memoir and project out into the world an image of themselves in which they're perfectly good at everything. They just needed to stop listening to the haters and start taking themselves seriously because they're so badass. And you see the parallel there, right? So given my line of work, I thought I would set to writing these observations out to see if they resonated. And so I started by pointing out how there have been, in particularly recent entertainment, with this Rey character from the Disney Star Wars trilogy, with the new incarnation of Galadriel from the Amazon fan fiction, we'll call it Rings of Power, and other depictions like Captain Marvel from the Marvel comic book saga, and other characters. There's no short supply of Mary Sue characters. And so I wrote a thread it was basically a novella length, or perhaps manifesto length, or treatise length post, an article that I posted on Twitter, which at that time was still called Twitter, in December 2022. And it got initial engagement. People agree with it. The vast majority were positive, mostly from women saying, yes, I've felt for at least a decade now that I can't show my daughter any entertainment that features women because it shows women acting badly. But look how badass she is. She's so amazing. She's such a boss, showing up those patriarchist, chauvinist men. Look at that. I don't want to show my daughter that sort of stuff. Like, you can act poorly in public if you're a woman. Seriously, I don't want to show my daughter any of that. So all of it was overwhelmingly positive, the feedback, and then the fandoms, and then the Disney Star Wars fandom found it, and I got canceled. I became the #1 top story on social media for that weekend in December 2022, and as part of that, there were numerous articles written about me. At that point, I was in TMZ, MSN, Yahoo, other outlets, not just the mainstream news, but the kind of the left wing media influence scape, we'll call it. Absolutely gutted me, and it was beautiful. And I got to see how fake news is manufactured, being at the center of one of these stories. So what would happen is they would say, the media coverage of it would quote half a sentence of like a full length 280 character tweet. They would grab the start of a sentence, and they would lift it and put it in there, and they would say, uh, self. I love that it was a self-proclaimed ghostwriter. Like, it wasn't like, no, I'm actually a ghostwriter. He's a self-proclaimed. He's not a real ghostwriter. He's a self-proclaimed ghostwriter. So
Fair enough.
already they're doing a little bit of mass manipulation to diminish this person that they want to deem as a bad guy. So they want to make it clear he's a bad guy. He's not legit. He's not credible. He's terrible, evil, horrible, no good, very bad, white male. Right? This is usually how it goes, obviously. And so this was the outset. Self-proclaimed ghostwriter says, and they took that half a sentence. They stuck it in quotes, cut out the rest of what I'd said in that sentence. So they cut it in half, not just out of context, out of sentence.
Yeah.
Right? And they would say, Joshua Lisec said, self-proclaimed ghostwriter Joshua Lisec says, and then cut off the rest of what I said in that sentence. And then they would say, which means Lisec thinks, and like other white supremacists and male chauvinists and anti-feminists, Lisec believes, and they sort of out of nowhere, stuff as many of these accusations in their labels as possible, and then assign me opinions that not only do I not hold, but were not evident in my actual posting. It was cultural commentary based on my book writing experience, coaching people how to not write terrible stories about themselves. And I saw obvious parallels. And of course, the vast majority of commenters agreeing with me were women. That didn't matter. So this is how fake news is generated. So anytime the press attacks someone, they use these identical measures to it's called, I like to call it assassination, where they're trying to neutralize the person so that they don't have to necessarily assassinate them. But if they make them no longer a person who's listened to by anyone of importance, that's effectively the same. They're just wasting their time and energy talking to no one. They've neutralized them. And that is what happened when both the mob and the press came for me, and it was a lot of fun. But of course, what did I do? I shared every single one of my haters' diatribes against me, and I dropped links to my products underneath them. And that was a very profitable, very successful, not just day, but weekend, week, month. Generated hundreds of $1,000s, US dollars worth of new business over the next couple of months directly from that. And now people know me as the guy who is like standing before this army of hate. And I just simply said no to everyone, saying, apologize, shut up, take it down. There's still time to delete this, Joshua. We're going to ruin you. My favorite remarks to this day were the people who said, look at this person who's obviously a virgin incel. And I would simply reply to that with a picture of my family, censoring the faces of the children, of course, and say,
Sure.
I'm married with children. Right? So you realize that there's no sense to any of the hate you're going to get. So just do what you want. Do your
Mm.
thing anyway. And what's beautiful about this is that it becomes marketing for you. Like I point out in one of the closing chapters of So Good They Call You a Fake, when you stand before the mob and laugh at them, make fun of them, when you coast on them to make more money than if they'd never come along in the first place, you become a role model. You become someone people want to buy from simply for that. People booked me to be their book coach, to be their ghostwriter, to be their editor. And the number one reason they gave was when they reached out to me and said, Joshua, I saw you Mary's Twitter thread. I loved how you made fun of the mob and made them make you money. I want that energy on my book project.
Mm.
And so that's part of becoming anti-fragile, is being in places where you could be fragile and standing up to it and saying, no, I'm not doing that. No, I'm going to laugh at you. Whatever accusation you throw out against me, I'm going to turn into marketing. So I have the book title, right? So Good They Call You a Fake. So I've taken to creating custom book covers when someone accuses me of something. So I'll change the title on the book cover itself, and then I'll share the negative press, the hatred, the insults. And so it'll be So Good They Call You a White Supremacist. So good they call you a male chauvinist. So good they call you a grifter. So good they call you a jerk. These sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
And it's not my intent to necessarily get political, but my profession has been politicized unnecessarily. And I believe that the foundation of civilization is reciprocity, right? This is law. Like if you try to take people's stuff, your freedom will be taken from you. That's how we get civilization. That's how we get law and order. And so when someone tries to take my reputation, take my good name, I will take the energy and I will transfuse it into cash. It's only fair.
Mm. Business aikido, just taking what it is
Yes, exactly.
and transforming it. Yeah. And I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, it was $500,000, in extra sales in the next 6 months after posting this. I mean, you
That's
tripled
correct.
your product sales. Like that's huge, and all just because you like you said, you just stood up in front of that army of hate and said no. And like you're very right to point out that I mean, that's a rare stance. You come across someone who especially a more public figure who's willing to do that. That's not an everyday occurrence. I mean, there's more backtracking than standing up. I think.
Yes,
And I mean, like,
backtracking, apologizing,
yeah,
writing these long letters in legalese, that they post a picture of or a screenshot of, and then say nothing for like a week, and then crawl out of their den of self misery, self hate, and self shame. No reason for that. Yet that's what they
yeah.
do every single time, regardless of the legitimacy
Mm.
of the accusation or of the apology. There was something I saw this. I wonder if I inspired this, but there was a cartoonist recently who was doxxed, shamed, canceled rather horrifically on social media, and the first apology post that he makes is 33% off all my products. Use promo code and this, and then on the daily he was sharing his haters
Mm.
with advertisements for his products and the special sale that
Yeah.
he was running. And
Mm.
he would post gifs of like people counting $100 bills from movies or whatever, and he would say that face when you're canceled on Twitter.
Right.
And it's profiting off of it. But
Yeah.
that is the correct way. It's that reciprocity. Is they throw you shame and you transmute it into cash. And that
Mm.
approach to living maps onto everything you do in your public relations and your marketing and your advertising and how you think about the way you talk about yourself. And when you do that, you don't self-censor, you don't self-edit. You say things the way that they are. You tell the truth, as unpopular as it may seem. In all likelihood, 90% of people agree with you. They're just too afraid to say it because they've seen
Mm.
what happens when someone is forced to apologize and they're subjected to a struggle session. And in the internet age, struggle sessions are optional. They're optional. And that is where, you go on the apology tour and you say all the right things and you donate money and you humiliate yourself, or you let yourself be fired and you apologize for it and then you're broke for a while, or it can get rough. It could get rough, but it's
Mm.
optional. So struggle sessions are optional. And regardless of how politicized the negativity towards you is, or if it's related to a social issue, it doesn't matter. Because when you're willing to stand up for what you believe personally or professionally, you're going to get hate. But that's confirmation you're doing the right thing, you're saying the right thing.
Mm.
The day I announced my book, somebody reached out to me. He's a public speaking coach and instructor and trainer, that sort of thing. And he said, Joshua, when I saw the title of your book, I instantly got it. Because I realized that the first time someone told me I was a faker, I was a liar and a grifter, that was when I knew I made it. And that's the greatest reframe, to borrow the title Scott in this book. That's the greatest reframe. When you get the hate, when you get the accusation, when you get the fakery alleged fakery leveled at you, that's the confirmation that you've made it, that you're coming along in the right direction.
I feel as though that's true. And I mean, being like a business person, like you're in it for like to make a living, to support your family, to achieve all your financial goals. I mean, I don't see why you even care about someone whose opinion like has no power to direct your career, your future direction, your fate, as it were. I mean, why would you give them any sort of mental real estate? And it's a slow lesson that I don't think a lot of people learn, but the most successful business people that I've seen, like they regularly share. There's a guy on Twitter that I know. I still call it Twitter. Eddie Kwan, and his
Yes.
headline banner is like a negative comment about his emails, and how this guy says, your emails are shit, Eddie, but or you're not funny, but your emails are great, so I'm going to still read you, or something like that. And he has it as his Twitter banner, and I mean he's like wildly successful business wise, and regardless of what people may think about him, which is the goal. And I mean, like, this story's as old as time. I was reading a biography of Nietzsche, written by Walter Kaufmann, one of my favorite philosophers, and he was he was talking about how like literally did what you did, or what they did to you, to Nietzsche's work. I mean, they would chop off half a sentence and they'd pass it off as like the whole thing, and they'd take it completely, not just out of context, but actually chop up the literal words, and to suit their message, like suit the message that they wanted this philosopher to say, and like it happens all over, and you really do have to kind of stand up to it. I wonder, there's a book that just came out. It's called Choose Your Enemies Wisely by Patrick Bet-David. Have you read that? Do you follow his work at all?
I listened to interviews that he's given, or that he's done, rather, both given and done. And so I'm familiar with his message, with his stands, and it is over the top and assertive in a way we need more of. Unapologetic people who have a lot to stand for, who have a lot to lose. Patrick is a family man, married, children, business empire, family business empire, of course. And it's people who have a lot to lose who are usually the most afraid to lose it. To your point about what does it matter what other people believe, the fear of something is worse than the something itself, often. And so when someone is challenged in the public square, their first thought is, how bad could this get? And they're thinking, okay, so I'm going to lose my biggest client, I'm going to lose my top advertiser, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my ability to provide for my family, so I'm going to lose my marriage, I'm going to lose everything. And there's no way to regain any of it because my reputation's toast at that point. That's immediately what everyone goes to when they get a high-profile negative review, or someone accuses them of something, or they're doxxed, or a claim made about them, anything like that. That's immediately where the mind goes. And that's a lot of energy. But the process of becoming so good they call you a fake is where you transmute that energy. Because other people are afraid of the same thing happening to them. Good people who do good work. And now it's your opportunity to protect them by, number one, neutralizing the mob, so that those who participate in the mass cancellation effort of you, the deplatforming, the debanking, the destroying even, they not only perhaps regret it, because it didn't work. It only worked against their interests and in your favor. But maybe they won't do it to the next person. And so by standing up for yourself, you're standing up for hundreds, thousands, millions of other families, just like yours. And this is the orientation that Patrick has towards negativity, towards fake news, bad PR, bad press. Yes, I'm sure there's probably more that you want to unpack there, Matt. So I'll stop there.
No. It's every time I just let you talk, I learn something. I make new connections. I'm sure everyone else is too. So I'm happy to just let that happen. Yeah. Well, I was wondering if who you may have selected as an enemy. More specifically, what do you stand for and against? Like if someone were to think of you and your like the things that you are most principled about, like these things that you will not backtrack about. What are they? What do you stand for?
Yes. So my public record of what I stand for is first and foremost based on what I stand against, and maybe that makes me a little bit reactionary, but what I'm for is a little vanilla, and that is like honest business, great work, good family, vanilla, that
Yeah.
sort of thing, right? But
Well, you say that, but I mean, even this sort of like attack on expertise, almost, like it's like people don't trust experts anymore for something. Like even though like they're experts, like you should like they've built up like credible like competence, like they're actually like they are who they say they are, and it's just even still, like and this idea that you can actually or should actually work hard, and it's sort of like people are actually against that idea, like the idea of excellence and doing your best and becoming like this expert and like that maybe it's not so vanilla, like it should be vanilla. I think, I mean, I agree. I mean, you should strive to do excellent work, and I mean, reciprocity and honesty in business is like transparency is huge, but it's like those are kind of like controversial, like strangely, but go on.
yes, and even so, and to speak to that, I've worked with a lot of health influencers, physicians, nursing professionals, people with all sorts of credentials. And what's fascinating about that topic, and it does map onto other socio-political issues outside of healthcare medical issues, is that just because the official narrative is probably bunk doesn't mean your conspiracy theory about it is correct. And so I see that over and over and over and over again, how someone will believe something about a particular pharmaceutical product or therapeutic because the official sources said so, even though the official sources are getting paid by the butt ton for saying that. That doesn't now then go and mean that the novella length meme that grandma shared on Facebook about that company, about that person, about that public health organization is correct. And so it seems like there is this strange polarity of tribes that happen where there are the devotees of the official narrative coming out of institutions, and it's correct because the experts trademarked said so. Well, then you ask them why, they say, well, don't be a bigot. It is what is. It's correct because they say it's correct. Well, what evidence do you have for that? Well, because they said so. They're the experts. They're the authorities. So sort of expertiseism, I find it to be an issue. And then there's the other end, which is, well, whatever the experts say, the opposite of it's true. So there's a strange battle amongst health influencers between carnivores and vegans, which is rather fun. Where someone who said, so it's not enough for, let's say, a low carb ketogenic diet influencer to say, they can't just say red meat is good for you actually and doesn't actually cause heart disease or contribute to cardiovascular event risk. They will say vegetables are bad for you. And just because what official sources say about the nutrition benefits of carbohydrates or lack thereof, and then which carbohydrates you're talking about here, right? Just because they might be a little sketch and a little influenced by lobbying from high carb food product manufacturers, which is a known phenomenon. Just because there could be some compromise to the claims being made by the official sources doesn't then go and mean that spinach is going to kill you and that strawberries give you heart disease. So there's a strange immediate polarization that happens in which both sides are completely missing the point. It can be true that institutions of self-proclaimed experts are corrupt, but that doesn't mean that there are not also alternative experts who are also corrupt and who are also grifting, who are also trying to sell their desiccated liver pill supplements marked up at 3x the actual price of manufacture of what it would be in retail stores. And so I am in the middle ghostwriting for both of them.
Nice. You're like the investment banker investing in both sides. No, okay. So we talked about controversy. Like how? I mean, that can't like that's not the only way to stand out online. Or in general, like how to build a really strong, solid personal brand. What else is working nowadays to capture that currency of attention? What do you see? What do you see people doing? What's working for people?
Yes, I'll now close the loop I opened with the Mary Sue story, which was that the inspiration behind that was encouraging public figures to tell three-dimensional stories about themselves, not just as I was born successful, I made myself successful even more, and then look how way more successful I am, and you can be successful too if you just buy my stuff. And 200 pages of that doesn't really sell it as a memoir.
No.
What do you like? What do you not like? What are the factoids that will just stick with people? Who will be able to relate to struggles? Who can you be a voice for? These sorts of things. It just so happens this also becomes personal branding advice for the rest of us. Branding, of course, is what people remember you for, what people associate you with, whether you want that or not, or attended that or not. And personal has to do with you, the person, the founder. If you're a services provider, then you're the person who's for hire. You want to be the authority in your space. So then any personal branding efforts you do must differentiate yourself from others. And if you're too businessy, let's say, if you're one-dimensional, unidimensional, and are singularly focused on one particular thing, then you become a walk and talk and commercial, not a real person. Much in the same way that many female protagonists are off-putting, most particularly to women, because like, I'm not like that. We're not like that. It's terrible. Like that's not a woman. That's not a female role model. What are you talking about? And okay, we're not showing my daughters that, right? That sort of reaction. The business equivalent of that is, I don't want to work with that guy. Like that's too weird. It's too commercial. I like that. That doesn't look right. It's the wrong kind of being called a fake. It's where you're a real fake. You're an authentic fake at that point, where you're not necessarily being forthright and honest, and it comes off like you're afraid to be. Like you don't want to talk about your personal life or your beliefs or your interests or anything like that. Because, well, what if I alienate people for doing that? Building deeper relationships, what are called parasocial relationships, where people have rapport with you, even from a distance. They have an affinity to you, your name, your products and services, what you stand for, your slogan. And they have positive associations and memories with that. And like, oh yeah, he's the... Okay, so my brand is something like, oh yeah, he's that dude who ghostwrites all those books and he's super based on Twitter. That's probably my personal brand. So when there is a public figure who is super based and need a nonfiction book ghostwriter, there's only one option, me. So I get first pick of everyone who is in my, let's say, target market, my total addressable market, right? Because of that personal branding effort. But people know me that way because I'm not afraid to share personal stories or to talk about what I believe. Even if people disagree with it, they don't necessarily go, huh, okay, well, that person is bad. I don't like what they believe or what they think or what they do, so I'm not going to work with them. That's okay. Also, being forthright about yourself, and I'm not even talking about political or religious opinions and views. I'm talking about your interest in nature, what you find fascinating, how you spend your time, what you value personally, not even on socio-political issues, your favorite kinds of foods, having opinions about these things, and not being afraid to water yourself down in public so as not to alienate. Choose your enemies wisely, Patrick Bet David has said. part of that is being willing to be disliked by people you don't want to do business with.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, that probably is the meaning of the book itself, is being willing to be disliked by people you don't want to do business with in the first place.
Mm.
Because to repel is to attract. And so if you think about, well, designing your personal branding strategy, who do I never want to work with, ever? Well, then create content that will put them off of you.
Mm. Yeah.
And the result of that will be people that you do want to work with you, coming to you and asking to work with you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are two sides of a magnet, right? I mean, there's the side that attracts and the side that repels. I mean, you can't have both. I think the worst thing is to have people feel nothing about you, and to be just ambivalent, just like not have any opinion of you whatsoever. I think Oscar Wilde said something like, it's, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about, and I think a lot of people are uncomfortable being talked about, obviously. But I think if you can step into that, it's financially lucrative, and I mean it's great for like career visibility, personal branding. I think you're right on the authenticity side as well. I mean, you've seen Sam Solik, the bodybuilder, just blow up on everything basically. I mean, he's how many millions and millions and millions of YouTube subscribers does he have? And all of his videos, they start off kind of in the same way. It's him in his car talking about bodybuilding stuff or like something, and then about his upcoming workout, and then it's him filming his workout, and then him driving, or him showing like post workout and then driving home. And there's no edits, there's no like flashing, like retention editing, it's called, no bells and whistles, just him speaking directly to camera. And I mean, these are hour-long videos of no editing, and he's got millions of people watching these videos every single day. So I think authenticity is something that people are going to want to lean into a lot. And now you have I want to mention too, because we're kind of running out of time, you have a new course, how to write about yourself, and a new book coming out. You got a bunch of stuff coming out. So just tell us about that.
Yes. So the personal branding advice does parlay itself into its own work, its own space, its own dedicated information product, and that's the best way to write about yourself. Where it's a 14-day adventure into how do you create a habit, a system of writing about yourself in such a way as to attract those perfect opportunities that you won't otherwise attract if you're being boring or one-dimensional or just all business all the time. But then how do you talk about yourself in a way as to not be the other kind of boring, which is like you're not even a public figure at all. You're just a person sharing sports scores and pictures of beer, on social media, where there's no interest, there's no engagement whatsoever. But actually being interesting. What is the process for identifying those aspects of yourself that you ought to share? And then in what way, what depth, what extent, how often, where? All of those questions are answered in the best way to write about yourself. Now, in the socio-political sphere, I'm waiting out there again with a new book that's now in pre-order, available from Skyhorse Publishing. Skyhorse Publishing is the go-to publisher for all of the let's say the rogues of society, of Western society. So it makes sense that I belong there. They do publish quite a few politicians, both Democrats and Republicans here in the United States, and also those from outside the U.S., Canada, and United Kingdom, for example. But they are known for publishing the most controversial figures, including those who have been quote unquote canceled. So I'm in perfect company there. And I talked earlier about values. Now, what I value is pretty vanilla, but I have a large disvalue circle, and that would be all the things that are intent on destroying what I and lots of people, normal people, value. And I witnessed this December of 2022 with the Mary Sue thread, and how my response to it was unexpectedly inspiring, and people bring it up to me out of nowhere to this day, more than a year later, as being one of the highlights of their entire social media experience ever. Just witnessing that, because of how much it meant to them. Had this mass mob of both anonymous haters and actual institutional news acting in obvious bad faith to destroy me. And not everyone is, unfortunately, able to neutralize it the way that I was Not everyone has the business or the means to be able to. I probably, if I had had an 8 to 5 job, I probably would have gotten fired by Monday morning, and it would all be over and it all came crashing down. So what's it going to take to prevent this from happening? That is let's say that's the focus, in a way, of a new book that I've co-authored with a friend named Jack Posobiec. We've covered quite a bit here, Matt, on all manner of topics. A lot of people, they try not to mix business, personal, political, business versus political controversy. They try to stay away from all of those. But part of my own personal brand is you can't do that, because we live in a world of total war. And I don't mean that to be exaggerating or to be ironic even, but there's conflicts that any of us can find ourselves in the information space, on the internet, on social media, being targets of disinformation, targets of misinformation, targets of malinformation, and tools of mass manipulation being deployed on behalf of corrupt businesses, corrupt industries, corrupt causes against everyday, average, normal people. And so I do what I can to use my platform to preach about this, but also point out that when these forces frankly, of anti-civilization, when they come for you in your own little civilized world and your family and your business, you can put up a fight. You can point and you can laugh and you can make bank off of their back.
You know what? And that's one hell of an inspiring message, at least to me. And people that think like we do. And I wanted. I mean, obviously, I make this podcast is about you, right? I didn't want to speak about my personal thing, but I'm actually going through something of a public thing. Like, it could be negative to some people, right? But I'm not backing down on this, and I won't go into details. I'm going to be very vague. But I may actually. It's actually kind of something that I'm working through. Like, how much do I share? How much do I lean into this and sort of use it to sort of catapult my personal brand? And I'll use the things that we've spoken about here today and that you've written about to sort of think on that. But like I said, the book of yours, So Good They Call You a Fake. Fantastic read, and I've shared it many times on my Instagram. I'll continue to share it, of course. But thanks very much for coming on. Anything you want to say before we kind of like wrap this up? Like, any parting shots, parting words?
Yes, and it will be one that wraps up everything that is both pertinent to the professional and to the personal, to the business and to the politics. And it is as follows: bad reviews from bad people are good reviews.
I don't waste time, no, I make time. All these people wanna hate, fine, I'ma make mine. While you sitting there complaining, I'll be training. While you sitting there just waiting, I'm creating. Yeah, sometimes I think that I'm unstoppable.